Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency. Auto, home, flood, business, 504-556-0809. Dave Miette, INSagency.com.
For over 48 years, Southern Tires and Auto Repair has provided services across the New Orleans metro area. Southern Tires offers a range of tires for all vehicles and ATVs. We also have a full suite of auto repair options, including brake repair, rim repair, custom exhaust, steering and suspension, tire siping, and so much more. Southern Tires and Auto Repair, 2550 Hickory Avenue in Metairie.
CNC Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, CNC provides patient-centered care for your entire family. CNC Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Ash, on this beautiful day here in New Orleans. Spring has sprung, right? Isn't that what they say? We'll see. Another cold front coming through. I'll take all we can get. We got a great show for you today. We've got Maddy Hudak of Saints Wire and also, again, the Tulane sideline reporter, Brooke Kirchhofer of WWL Channel 4 Sports is with us. And, of course, we'll talk Saints, LSU, Tulane, Pelicans. We'll run the gamut today as we always do on the program. Ladies, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming down. We've been looking forward to doing this for a while. Maddy, welcome back to the show. Once again, if you would, tell folks a little bit about what you're involved in. You're going to be doing a little Pell stuff tonight as well. But let everybody know about what's going on with you.
Sure, and again, thanks for having me on. So as you mentioned, I cover the Saints on the Saints Wire for USA Today, and I am Tulane sideline reporter. Looking forward to their scrimmage this Saturday, and as you mentioned, I sometimes fill in doing stats for the Pelicans with Todd Graffinini up in the radio booth.
Beautiful. Brooke, this is your first time with us, so welcome. And what we always like to do is let the audience know a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, background, how you got to New Orleans, how much you like New Orleans or you don't like New Orleans.
Well, number one, love New Orleans, and thank you for having me on the show. So I've kind of bounced around a little bit. So born south of Philadelphia, raised in Houston, worked in Georgia in my first market, second market just across the street in Baton Rouge, and now I'm here at WWL. Been here for almost 2 years now and have just loved everything about New Orleans, specifically, of course, the sports.
Yeah, and of course, covering everything for WWL, right? And once again, tell us about the great shows over at WL. You obviously got the granddaddy of them all, right?
Oh, yes. 4th Down on 4 every Sunday after our 10 o'clock newscast, which, because of basketball, knock on wood, hopefully not too late, right?
Not too late,
on Sunday. But it's been a lot of fun. We do a lot of great coverage. And, of course, with that 4th Down on 4 show, we always have new content coming in. So make sure you tune in on Sundays.
There you go. Set the DVR like I do. I got them all. I got them all set. All right, guys, let's start. I want to start off on a kind of a somber note. Foster Moreau, New Orleans native, Jesuit graduate of LSU, Las Vegas Raider, and of course would probably have been a New Orleans Saint is what it looked like. Was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Actually went through a physical with the New Orleans Saints. They found that's the second time their medical staff has found, again, a malady with a player and pretty much saved their life. He'll be out of football for a while. The good news is this is a cancer that, again, you can overcome, that can be cured, and we expect him back on the football field at some point. But our thoughts and prayers go out to Foster Moreau and his entire family. Ladies. I mean, just very, very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never a good thing to find out, but as you said, it's better to find that out sooner rather than later and enter that treatment. So from a sports perspective, it's a downside, but on the other side, it's probably a life-saving diagnosis. So happy and hoping that he has a safe recovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with him. We were honestly looking forward to it. I think the news came out a couple weeks ago that he was visiting with the New Orleans Saints. Of course, that is a position of need. They do return Jawan Johnson, Taysom Hill kind of still in that hybrid role. Adam Troutman, we'll see what happens there, but he could have come in and really rounded out that group. So disappointing that he's not going to be a part of the Saints, which, as you mentioned, it looked like that deal was potentially going to go through, and the Saints really have just been busy this free agency.
Well, they have. And it's been amazing, hasn't it? Well, not really, because we know, right? We know Mickey Loomis. We know Luminomics, right?
Oh, yes.
We know all about what he does, Kai Harley does. Saints have given out, the third highest amount of bonuses, courtesy of Saints Wire. Also, again, sixth in the NFL in terms of available cap room now, at around somewhere between 14 and 10. NFLPA's got it at 10.5. Some of the other services have it at about 14 million. Still a lot of money. And they're sixth in the NFL right now in terms of available cap space to be able to go out and make some moves. I'd like to get your take, first of all, on what they have done so far in signing Carr, in signing Shepard and Saunders, the two defensive tackles, Williams, the running back, Norton, who will be a swing guy in terms of the offensive line. Yesterday, Jonathan Abram from Mississippi State safety, and then Lonnie Johnson Jr., again, a versatile corner. Those are the ones that they brought in as free agents. And I'd like to get both of you guys' take on how you think they've done thus far.
I mean, just think about how they did last year, where they swung and missed for Deshaun Watson and then ended up re-signing Jameis Winston. There wasn't really supposed to be a quarterback competition, but then due to an injury, he lost the starting job. Andy Dalton kind of goes on for the season, and they didn't really make any big splash moves because they were sort of in this wait period, having to hold that cap space on the off chance that they did sign Deshaun Watson. So this year, the first thing they did was the paramount position of getting a quarterback. And I think this is really their first legitimate replacement since Drew Brees retired. It's someone that Dennis Allen is familiar with his time on the Raiders. And from what I understand, him and Pete Carmichael, the idea that he'll be able to have a little more responsibility at the line of scrimmage and do things that necessarily weren't being done last year. The first day of free agency, they lost basically all of the interior on the defensive line. That being said, it wasn't necessarily an area of strength with the guys that were there. Thought that, if they were to re-sign Onyemata, they would have still needed to bolster that. But they've always kind of, in free agency, for the right price and the right player, and they're not necessarily willing to move those parameters one way or the other. I really like that they signed another defensive lineman from Kansas City, because I think that Andy Reid had similar kind of draft prototypes with Tano Passanyoung, who worked out really well in his versatility with the Saints. And so to add him and Shepard and the run-stopping ability that they bring, and then Jamal Williams is just, a ball of energy, which is kind of necessary, especially if Mark Ingram is likely going to retire. Alvin Kamara's suspension aside, I think he offers more of the tackle type run game, and kind of being able to play off Taysom Hill. I'll be curious to kind of see those short yardage situations if they get a little more creative with Wildcat and things like that.
Yep, no doubt. Your assessment of so far what they've done in free agency.
Oh, I would definitely give them an A. Is when you look at the scope of it. Of course, they match the big one, Maddy, with a huge contrast, Deshaun Watson to Derek Carr, but they land a guy who can provide consistency at a position that hasn't been there since Drew Brees was there. Fortunately for Jameis Winston, dealing with injuries, they've had 5 different starting quarterbacks, which included Trevor Siemian and Ian Book, who, my goodness, when you think about that time, it was, you would take a Derek Carr at any moment. Fans have been kind of lopsided as how they feel about Derek Carr, but I think not only will he bring in some consistency at the position, but leadership that's kind of been missing in the locker room from the quarterback that Drew Brees had and carried in that locker room. I still think they're going to, Maddy mentioned adding the defensive lineman. You still only have one true defensive tackle on the roster, so I think going into the draft, that has to be a position that they want to fill and will be aggressive. And I think we can all assume that that first round pick will be a defensive tackle, but adding in the running back, especially with that big personality, we don't really know what Alvin Kamara's suspension will look like coming this season, so that kind of adds you a role in that maybe you can still add to. I know Maddy would love to see Tajay Spears be added in.
I'm right there with you.
Right, but bringing in a veteran running back that can be plugged in right away, it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen in camp.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you both said. I think it's been really, they've been aggressive, which is not really their MO early. But again, as soon as they lost what they lost in the first week of free agency, they had a plan. They executed the plan, and they did it in such a way where they did it cap friendly, especially with Carr, right? That's a very cap friendly deal for them. Looks like the deals that they've made are cap friendly, but they're paying less for Saunders and Shepard than again Tuttle and Onyemata got from their teams. You know, the big loss might be Ellis because he has such great upside, but it is what it is at this point. You know, I love the addition of Williams as well. I think again they needed a back like that in case Kamara is gone for a specific amount of time, and those two guys can coexist in the backfield together, which is something you were looking for. I don't think it precludes them from getting again another running back in the draft. And as far as the defensive tackle position goes, 29 is a big man position. I mean, big men are going to fall to you there, whether it's going to be a guard or it's going to be a defensive tackle or maybe a defensive end. Probably not defensive end, though. There's always been a rush on that. That's the thing that I'm looking for next. Is that what they're going to look for now because they have this cap space? Are they going to go after a veteran defensive end that they can count on week in, week out, play in, play out, you know, within their rotation? Maddy?
I think it's hard to say at this point. I tend to err on the side of the Saints' philosophy, which is usually not drafting on a need base primarily.
Right. True.
So there are holes that need to be filled, and like you said, I don't think them signing Williams or those defensive tackles precludes them from drafting at those positions. To me, what it does is it gives them more freedom in the draft to perhaps be more aggressive for a player that they really like, and it be at the best position available, best player available. They don't have necessarily those gaping holes that they had a few weeks ago. So I don't think it really changes their draft strategy. I also think that if the Saints like someone, they tend to trade up and get them.
Right.
They have a lot of 5th and 6th round picks, and getting that, you know, 1st round draft pick from Sean Payton coming back is really big as well. In terms of what they do moving forward in free agency, I'm curious to see if they look at tight end still, because I wasn't really necessarily seeing them draft that early on, but with the situation with Foster Moreau, that might have shot up the list of needs, because I think Taysom Hill is probably going to go more into that running back role where he really tends to excel more than at tight end. Adam Trotman, it just hasn't been there for kind of that year 3 evaluation.
Kind of the year for him, right?
Yeah, and it might be just a matter of circumstance. It's hard to develop kind of raw players out of places. I believe he came from Daytona. Dayton. Thank you.
Ohio, right. Small school, right?
Yeah.
He did, I believe, quarterback, right? When he was there as well. Wasn't he in both, or quarterback at one point, too, in his early career?
Possibly.
So,
whatever it is, again, it didn't translate to again, the NFL game, and he's been. Again, a lot was expected of him coming out of school, that again he could come in and really work out with the Saints. This is kind of the year for him. I mean, this is kind of make it or break it in this 3rd year, and that's why I agree with you. They may be looking for a tight end as well. Quarterback position. They bring in Carr, again, who's your starter. Now, again, it's a 4-year deal. They could get out in 2 years if they need to. Winston's on a 1-year deal, very cap-friendly deal. We'll get into that in a few minutes. Does it preclude them, in your opinion, of possibly drafting a quarterback in this draft, considering that you're on a 2-year deal with Carr, you're only on a 1-year deal with Winston, and man, look, Hendon Hooker really looks really good, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round if he happens to fall, for a guy that, again, you can take your time with in terms of developing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think those numbers speak volumes. I absolutely don't think the Saints are looking away from quarterback in the draft. I think they absolutely will go after a quarterback if they like one, and if there's one that happens to fall on their board, I think they're going to go after that. They like developing quarterbacks. They're not a team that typically likes to just throw somebody in and start them right away. That's a rookie quarterback. And so with Derek Carr and Jameis Winston, which I think was a surprise to all of us that he did agree to stay, and it says a lot about Dennis Allen and that coaching staff that a lot of fans maybe thought were in turmoil, wasn't sure what was going on with the offensive coordinator. Jameis Winston staying really says a lot about this front office and this coaching staff. But no, I think if they like a quarterback in this year's draft, based on the numbers, Derek Carr, like you mentioned, 2 to 4 year deal. If they bring in a quarterback, there's your option if things don't work out with Derek Carr.
Right, and they can develop it. What are your thoughts? Do you think that's still a possibility here early in the draft?
it's the most important position on the field.
Right.
So if there's a guy that they like and it's available, we haven't really seen them draft a quarterback that seems like a legitimate, feasible possibility. Sure, Ian Book was kind of a fever dream for a while, maybe under Sean Payton, and maybe if he wasn't thrown to the absolute wolves with no offensive line and no starters in that game that Brooke alluded to, then we might have seen something different. But it was never really, oh, this is the heir apparent to Drew Brees kind of thing. Whereas, yeah, you have that veteran leadership, and I think she also touches on a good point where I think Dennis Allen, there was the spotlight on him was huge last year. Sean Payton's shoes are massive to fill, and when you follow that with the departure of Drew Brees the year prior to that, it's an easy job to step into in the sense that it wasn't a job where someone got fired and it's a disaster, but you also don't have a high draft pick because they've been doing well, and you don't have a quarterback. You're dealing with kind of the pandemic, which I think really bad timing to say the least, because that's kind of where the defensive tackle room evaporated almost and just kind of limited them in so many ways. So trying to sign a quarterback that next year. But I think that this free agency period, that aggressiveness that he's shown, I think this is really his identity kind of forming as head coach of the team. A lot of it is similar to Sean Payton, and I think a lot of that ties back to Mickey Loomis in the sense of the cap strategy and in free agency. But I think the aggressiveness to go get Derek Carr was a good move because when you're also talking about free agents at tight end and wide receiver, or even at running back at that, we saw them miss out on guys like Odell Beckham Jr. because they don't really want to be thrown to by Trevor Siemian, to be honest.
True.
So they've had such turmoil and turnover at that position that at least you identify a guy and you have that ability in free agency to pitch that kind of thing too. So I just think there's so much more consistency this year already than last year, despite there maybe being more obvious holes. Quarterback, again, it's the paramount role.
Well, we see, again, Carr's fingerprints all over this already. Michael Thomas re-signing with, again, a cap-friendly deal. Foster Moreau looked like he was going to sign. Abrams said one of the reasons why he signed with the Saints was, again, Derek Carr being here. So, again, we were already seeing that. Andres Pete restructured his deal. He was the last one to really restructure the deal in terms of veterans. They have restructured every deal they can restructure now to be able to get under the cap and have cap room. Brooke, as I mentioned, when you get to the end of the draft, that you start to see again the defensive tackles maybe fall, maybe again the guards fall. You're always going to get a premium on defensive ends and also on offensive tackles. Does this preclude the Saints from going after and getting another guard, considering this is going to be the last year of Pete's deal, and of course the fact that he's been injured? Is offensive line, especially on the interior, still a need for this team in your opinion?
Absolutely. When you just look at the last two seasons and the number of injuries, I think they had a new starting offensive line or rotation almost every week. I remember we traveled for the Pittsburgh game, and the question was, who the heck is starting at center? Right. And so you throw him in, and it was just insanity when you think about just the last 2 years and how many injuries have happened, especially too at the tackle positions. Unfortunately, Trevor Penning, he is still currently in a walking boot. And remember, the Saints are not afraid of drafting linemen, whether that's on the offensive or defensive side of the ball, early on. Of course, last year they went with the wide receiver and Trevor Penning, but in the years prior, it's been a defensive lineman and then an offensive lineman the year before that. And so we've seen them really be aggressive for those roles. And to them, I still think those positions on the offensive line are positions of need to build around Eric McCoy if you do have those injuries again. And remember, Eric McCoy even faced some injuries of his own. So you have to have those 2 and 3 spots behind every position on the offensive line every NFL season. And right now, it's a little shaky on who the 2s and 3s are with the Saints.
They did bring in Storm Norton, who seems like he's going to be a guy that can play multiple positions. But your opinion, is this a draft where they will go after another offensive lineman, or maybe pick up another one in free agency if necessary?
I think that the Saints have shown time and time again that if there's someone that they identify in the trenches on either side of the ball, that they will draft them in the first round. Just thinking again back to them being successful under Drew Brees, they had a strong running game, which I think they also got away from the last couple of seasons. A lot of teams in the NFL did at that. Kind of feel like they've undervalued running back, and the passing game has suffered as a result. But all of that ties back to the offensive line, ties back to the center, that communication, setting the protection, snapping the ball, high snap, and the play's dead. There was a point, where it was the 2021 season, but they were getting someone fitted in a uniform in the stadium the night of the game. Like that just can't really be the case here. And so they lose Terron Armstead. They followed up with Trevor Penning, and he gets hurt. And then Andres Pete, yes, he restructured his deal, but he hasn't been able to play for an entire season being fully healthy.
Right.
Cesar Ruiz, I think, was a surprise to everyone last year, but just like Brooke said, one domino falls there, and I don't even know who the two is, except for maybe Eric McCoy.
Right.
Cesar Ruiz might, at this point, be able to handle stepping in at center, but then you have to fill right guard. So I would not be mad at all if there was a strong interior guard or tackle for that matter, and they took him with 29.
Well, and the last time I saw Cesar Ruiz, he was in a boot as well at the end of the season. So you have these constant injuries, and I don't want to question the training staff, but the offensive line has just been beat up the last 2 years. So figuring out these ankle and toe injuries is really going to be key going into this next season, but you have to have those guys lining up behind them, because I don't know where Cesar Ruiz and Trevor Penning's timeline is right now to return for camp.
Right. I'll question the training staff for both. No, and I'm being honest here. And again, I've talked about a lot on my radio show. Again, they have to look internally and try to. I'm talking about Pelicans and Saints. Too many injuries for both of those franchises that have set them back in terms of their ability to be able to get into the playoffs and move on, to be able to develop players. They got to take a hard look at this, because it looks like it's an issue across the board with both franchises. You can't talk about the medical staff. They just did another life-saving deal with Foster Moreau, but how they're training, how they're preparing their players for on both sides, the Pelican side and the Saints side, for the season has to be looked at, because again the onslaught of injuries we've seen over the last few years. A guy that's been injured who's coming back now is Michael Thomas. Comes back on a cap-friendly deal. They needed a guy that could do contested catches. If he's healthy, he could be one of the best in the NFL. If he's not, we'll see how it plays out. But it was a cap-friendly deal on the part of both. Plus, with the re-signing of Winston and Thomas, that kicks that dead money that was coming due this year into next year. So that's why you're seeing this large amount of cap money available. Your thoughts on the return of Michael Thomas?
I think it was a safe deal, but again, if he plays well and things work out, he gets all that money at the end of the year. But Michael Thomas has never been someone who is afraid to share their opinion, and I think he was one of the first guys on social media that when the Derek Carr news started to break, he was the first one to just be excited about it, and kind of seeing that turnover at the quarterback position, that you can get a guy like Derek Carr in this position when that position has been in question for the last couple of years since Breeze left. I think that will also rejuvenate something in Michael Thomas. And the fact that he's excited to get back on the field and that we're hearing it and seeing it from him, I think speaks volumes. He's always, I know people have a lot to say about whether he was sitting himself out and his injury and things like that. From the trainers that I talked to, it was almost that Michael Thomas was wanting to get back so quickly that it could have re-injured, and that he really wanted to be back on the field. And he's somebody that is constantly wanting to prove that, hey, I am the best. And so he's not somebody that if they give him 80%, he's going to be on the field. So it's going to be interesting to see how he shakes back from these injuries. And also, what type of wide receiver does he look like on the field? Is he still going to be super violent in his cuts, or is that something that's going to have to change? And I think that's the case too for Zion Williamson. Is do you have to change maybe the way you play, because there's not a lot of people in this world that have the talent that you do. I mean, not everybody can cut so violently on a field like Michael Thomas. Maybe that's why there are those injuries. I don't know, but that might be something he has to change.
Thoughts on Michael Thomas?
Yeah, and just to add to that sentiment, to go back to kind of Tajay Spears, that happened to him after his ACL tear, where he learned to adjust the way that he played, have better field awareness to get vertical upfield and not have to make those types of cuts, but also having that trust in his body. But I agree from the perspective of, Michael Thomas. I don't think he was trying to sit out, because I think a lot of people discount what competitive mindsets are like. If you didn't play competitive sports, or I don't know if you just kind of forgot what it's like, but everyone hates to be injured. Everyone tries to come back a little too early. And when you look at the injuries that he had, I had a high ankle sprain, and that really screws everything up. But he looked back to true form in training camp. But those hamstring injuries, something I do want to bring up, because I think that, especially with the Pelicans, there's a spotlight on what's wrong with Zion Williams' hamstring. And as someone that has had probably 5 or 6 hamstring injuries at minimum, it's the most unpredictable and debilitating injury that there can be, thinking about wide receivers having to make, and defensive backs. I remember Marshawn Lattimore's sophomore season, he got a lot of flack, and I remember pointing to the fact that he had issues with his hamstring all season. When you're backpedaling and have to turn and burst out of that, that's the muscle that you have to work on. I pulled mine doing sprints, because that's really what happens. And So it's also something that you think it's fine, and then you come back, and then you make the wrong move, and you're back to square one.
Right.
So with something like that, I just think hamstring and ankle injuries to me are just so unpredictable and really can't speak to anything. The only thing I would point to is potentially the turf.
Right.
That would be more my thing,
Yep.
especially with the Saints, because they're one of the few teams that have this type of turf that has a little 3 heads at the top, and,
Right.
and I read that can kind of twist cleats.
Right.
So I'd be curious to see, I personally think all NFL stadiums should be grass at this point,
Right.
but all of those things to say, I think there's also a little bit of perhaps proximity bias. I
Right.
cover other teams.
Right.
So a lot of the injuries last year were freak injuries, like a lacerated kidney and all the things that went wrong.
Yeah.
But if I was covering another team, would I be more aware, I guess, of what their injury issues are? So I think there's the fair spotlight, but they're also, I think they're the only NFL and NBA team that is tied together. So I think that also just unfortunately adds to the perception of it because it's 2 separate sports.
Right. They did have grass in the dome at one time for a soccer game way back when, okay? Just not, again, something that we can do here. It's not like, again, in Arizona where you can roll it in, roll it out.
Right.
Because it is a multi-purpose stadium, which, again, a lot of things are also, other things are going on. Before we leave the Saints, I do want to ask one question to both of you. Loss of Davenport, Ellis, Tuttle, Onyemata, Hardy, Dalton. Biggest loss for this team, if there is one.
I guess Caden Ellis, I'd say,
Okay.
because I think they would have overpaid for Onyemata. I think Marcus Davenport just did not work out.
Right.
He can't stay on the field. Caden Ellis, there's no place for him because they primarily run a nickel defense with 2 linebackers out there. So I understand why he went on and sought greener pastures, but I think what they lose in him that we don't see as much of from Pete Werner and Mario Davis, and we saw a little more from Quan Alexander, was rushing off the edge and blitzing. So I think they lose that with Caden Ellis, but I also think that they've shown the ability to develop linebackers. Everyone undervalued Pete Werner, and we're like, who is this guy out of Ohio State? To me, he is one of the best draft picks that they've had
Injuries held
in
him back.
several years.
Right.
Even that, he's missed so much time in training camp.
Right.
Just his play speed, his ability to diagnose plays, his functional strength, his tackling. He's just such a clean, smart player, and one of my favorite players on the team.
Yeah. Interesting, again, you talk about the rushing the passer. That is what Zach Bond did at Wisconsin, and they have never really utilized that. Maybe they'll do that this year in camp. Same question to you about the defections. Is there one that, again, that is the biggest loss in your opinion?
I have to agree with Maddy. It's hard to say because you really, especially with Caden Ellis, it's really, you're not going to know long term, right? When they signed or restructured DeMario Davis's deal, it was kind of like, okay, Caden Ellis is now losing a potential starting position because they do typically just go DeMario Davis and Pete Werner. And Pete Werner has ascended every single year that he has been in the NFL, still a very young player, and I think he still even hasn't reached his ceiling yet because he's dealt with some lingering injuries on the side as well. Of course, we missed him at the beginning of training camp last year, but Caden Ellis went to Atlanta because it's a starting role. And I think the Saints could have matched or possibly could have, or they possibly did match that number. But for Caden Ellis, he gets to go and start, and for a defensive coordinator that he worked with.
Exactly.
So I think that's the biggest loss. With these defensive linemen that have moved on, obviously David Onyemata is tough. They loved him in the locker room. We actually interviewed him after their last game, and Cam Jordan was standing right next to him. You're not leaving me, right? You're not leaving me. And he's moving on to a better deal. They're all getting more money as far as the defensive line.
More than what the Saints wanted to pay, I think.
And Marcus Davenport, they just hadn't seen it from him yet. And I think they feel like they can continue to develop Peyton and also see who they can get in the draft. So we'll see what happens.
Great announcement for both of you guys. We're going to switch now from Saints to Pelicans after we get back from our break. We're going to hear from our underwriters, again, Brooke Kirchhofer of WWL Channel 4 Sports, and Maddy Hudak of, again, Saints Wire, and also the Tulane sideline reporter are our guests today. I'm your host, Eric Asher. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Stick with us.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Brooke Kirchhofer and also Maddy Hudak are our guests today. All right, let's start with the Pels. 33 and 36, 12th place in the West right now. There are 10 games left. They take Charlotte tonight in the Smoothie King Center. 8 against the West, 2 against the East, 5 at home, 5 on the road. And the big news yesterday was the reevaluation of Zion Williamson. It's funny because the national pundits are now piling on once again. You need to trade Zion Williamson. Look, I'm on the record as saying they have to add players to this roster to augment the loss of Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson, because I think that it's been proven with, again, over the last few years that those guys are not staying healthy. They're missing 40 games a piece. So I think you have to, in the offseason, adjust where you are, realize that you need another strong player, whether that be, again, an outside shooter, interior defender, rim defender, somebody like that, to be able to augment the loss of again, those two guys for as long as they've been gone. He has been cleared for on-court activities. He'll be reevaluated in 2 weeks. That means 3 games left in the regular season. Memphis on the 5th of April, that's at home. The Knicks on the 7th of April, that's at home. And then the last game of the season on the 9th of April against Minnesota. Here's what the Pels are up against right now. They have lost tiebreakers that, again, could affect them in terms of, again, getting into that 10th spot, which would allow them to be able to get into the play-in tournament. Right now, they're 2-1 against Portland, who is behind them. They have 1 game left there. They have lost the tiebreaker to the Lakers 3-1. Lakers have the advantage there. Utah has the advantage again as well. They won the series 3-0. Minnesota is tied 1-1 with the Pels right now. There's 1 game left within that series. Dallas, the series is tied at 2, and then of course Oklahoma City. The Pelicans won that series again 3-1. I'll go as far as Golden State, which is again 2-1 with 1 left. The Pels hold that edge right now. They could tie that up, and just because of the injury to Paul George, that the Clippers may fall, let me throw them in there as well. The Pels are 1-0, but there are 2 games left, 1 at home and 1 away. So when you look at the tiebreakers, it doesn't look good for the Pelicans, again, because of the one-on-one. If, again, there is a tie on that, they go to the conference record, that's still up in the air. The question is, and again, let me say how this: Alvarado out for 2 to 3 weeks, probably not going to be back unless they get into the playoffs. He looks like he's done. I'll go with Brooke first, okay? Brooke, when you look at this team right now, the way it's playing, the lack of sense of urgency, almost the attention to detail in terms of losing games to a team like Houston. Tonight they have a Charlotte team that, again, is bad, that they need to win that game. They're on a 2-game winning streak. When you look at this, the possibility of them breaking in from 12 to 10. Now look, it's only half a game out, right? I mean, things are so tight, anything can happen. But can they go on a run here and make that, at least make that play-in tournament?
It's definitely a possibility, and as you've mentioned, some of these games they've entered where they've played lesser opponents, they've lost some of those games, right? They need to win tonight, but you mentioned the Paul George injury. He is not going to be available, I think, in both games.
Right.
The one coming up when they go to the Clippers, and then again in a few weeks from there, Paul George is not going to be available. So the Pelicans, I mean, that's really great for them. They have an opportunity to win both of those games. There is still a possibility they can move up. I think they just, from here on out, you just have to win out. They did get some good news, not great news about Zion Williamson. Remember, that means he's reevaluated in 2 weeks. That doesn't mean he's back, and that could look different from all aspects. I know it's good news from the fact that he will be back on the court, but what does that mean? Is that one-on-one? He's got to work all the way up to 5-on-5. That could take longer than 2 weeks, and when they reevaluate him, he might not even be at that step yet. I know that they want to get him back. A lot of people have asked, well, at this point, do you just sit him for the rest of the season? Look, if the Pelicans can manage a play-in spot or even a playoff spot, which is still a possibility right now. It's hard to believe that. I think they're maybe 2.5 games back from fifth.
If they would go on a winning streak, they could be right there.
It's right there. And so I think if they are playing in the postseason and Zion is available to be back, I mean at 100%, he is going to be playing. It's not like it was last year where he was out and wasn't even at practice and we never saw him. He's at practice and he is working to try and get back. So if he returns, the Pelicans absolutely have an opportunity. Jose Alvarado does hurt having him out, but you have at least the surrounding cast. You've got to ask a lot of CJ McCollum, and they have asked a lot of him this whole entire season, right? Jonas Valanciunas, everyone is going to have to step up in these last few games, which I think they can. So I think it's definitely a possibility.
Maddy, what's your take on the possibility of getting in the second season?
I think tiebreakers aside, like Brooke said, they need to win out because if not, there really hasn't been any momentum that this team has sustained since the beginning of the season. And you can point mostly to injuries on a lot of that. And the fact remains that last season, it was kind of this Cinderella story where Zion was out, Brandon Ingram went out, like you said, CJ McCollum continues to step up, Jose Alvarado comes out of nowhere, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and they gave the Suns a run for their money. I don't think that's going to repeat this year because they really started to sustain that momentum with that CJ McCollum and Larry Nance trade last year. At the deadline this year, there really wasn't any move. I mean, Josh Richardson's not bad, but it didn't put this team in a new category. So I also think moving forward, they do, like you said, I don't think that they can build this team around Zion and Zion alone anymore. And like Brooke said, he might have to change his style of play. But the fact is, he goes down and this team loses their identity. And Brandon Ingram having those injury issues as well, it is too much to ask of CJ McCollum. So I think just the psychology of things alone, they need to win out in order to really feel like they have a chance in that play-in. But like, again, we saw last year, if you get into the play-in, you win the play-in, then you're in the playoffs, and you have 5 games at minimum to get things going. It's not one and done kind of thing. So if they can just get to that point, I think they got really valuable experience last year. It would be really great if, again, Zion would be able to return so they can get that kind of playoff experience and see what it looks like with a Zion team. But again, as Brooke mentioned, I think it's important to note that the reevaluation does not mean that he's going to be back. And as I talked about earlier on this program, hamstrings to me are just the most unpredictable injury that there is. And, you know, I think you could say he might have durability issues, but this would seem more like a secondary injury, and that's usually what hamstrings are.
And it's not something you can play through, too. I want people to understand that, because that's the question, too.
Especially the way he plays.
Yes, and with a pulled hamstring, you're limited to do so many things. And, too, if it's already pulled, the likelihood of it snapping altogether. Maddy and I both have backgrounds on the soccer field. I have plenty of teammates that if you feel their quad, there's dents where it has torn or has torn on their hamstrings. Those muscles, when they are pulled in that nature, it's not something that you can really play through, and at the ferocity that Zion Williamson plays at his speed.
It's a tale of two teams, too. This team is not the same team as they were last year in terms of ball movement, player movement, defensive prowess, the ability to be able to create offense off their great defense. They have not been able to shoot the ball as effectively as they were last year. It's been more ISO ball with CJ McCollum and also Brandon Ingram. But we saw a different Pelicans team when Zion was in. So if Zion comes back, what team is playing then? Again, so, you know, how do you adjust on that? I mean, again, they need him back. They played their best ball when he was on the court. It'll be just interesting to see, again, how that plays out. I do want to ask about the national conversation right now, once again, about the trading of Zion Williamson. The Pels are all in. They made the investment. I don't think there's buyer's remorse, but I think there needs to be an adjustment, as I mentioned earlier in the show, that, look, if you got Brandon missing 40 games because he's not willing to play till he's 100%, we know Zion, he is just, because of his body type, he's going to be injury prone. You have to make allowances for that, and ultimately you're going to have to get another superstar type player in here. That's something that maybe a small market team doesn't want to do, because then you're going to be in a luxury tax, but it is what it is if you're going to be able to compete when your your two best players have the propensity to be able to be injured. Do you think it's even on David Griffin's mind right now to possibly trade Zion Williamson?
I don't. I mean, he's generational talent. My thing is, you can't build an offensive identity that centers around him because of his injury-prone nature. But I also feel like, as much as we talk about building his offense around Zion, to me, he's such a special player that you don't need to build an offense around him. If you stick him on the court, he's going to shine. Yeah. So I just think adding someone that can give them kind of, you see them sometimes do the kind of Warriors more around the perimeter shooting, and when Trey Murphy's hot, he's hot.
Yes.
But I really think they need a shooter that can incredibly get three-point shots, because as fun as it is to watch them in the paint, when you lose Zion Williamson, there goes that identity. And I think they had this scrappy, they knew that the chips were down last season, and they knew that Zion was not coming back. This year they started with Zion, and then they lost him. He comes back, they lose him again. So you kind of lose that gritty identity in a way. And I just think that they kind of need to get that center of direction down. But in terms of trading him, I just don't think that that's something that they need to do. They have so much capital still from, I believe, the lotto draft picks and whatnot. So if they want to make a move, they want to make a move. For as much as we say small market team, I think that perception can be a little misguided. I think New Orleans gets dunked on, to be entirely honest with you, be it the cap strategy management, when now they're cap compliant, signed their quarterback, signed their defensive tackle, signed a running back, and yet, it still gets that criticism. I think every year until they really make a playoff run, there's going to be this, they should trade Zion Williamson to another team. But I think what we're starting to see too is that these super teams don't always work out. And I would again point to the Warriors, which Willie Green came from. Yes, they signed Kevin Durant a long time ago, and they went and on that championship run. But I think their win last season was so important for the game of basketball, because it showed, sticking with these guys, playing together, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry. Klay and Steph could go play anywhere they wanted, and they've always chosen to stay there. So I think that really says a lot. And then, just looking at, I think it was the Nets. Is it the Nets that had Kyrie Irving? And then that all blew up along with Ben Simmons. So I just think the idea of this trade-happy NBA is starting to solidify more. But you don't trade Zion.
I will say this. I do think the blueprint for the success for the Pelicans is Golden State. I think you see that, again, they have athletic bigs, which again can coincide with Zion, and they have sharpshooters on the outside. And I think, again, I love Valanciunas, but at some point you have to look and see again what is going to get you to the next level. And I think that's the direction they have to go. I do also believe this is about ESPN trying to find things to talk about, more than anything else, because I don't think that this is on the Pelicans' radar to be able to trade this guy. He's the face of the franchise. Brooke, your thoughts?
Well, number one, I agree with Maddy that David Griffin, it's not something he's thinking about. It's not something Zion Williamson has been thinking about. I mean, I want to go back to last summer, where the first time we heard from him from the local media, I think it was at the YMCA. He held an event there with the Pelicans. He was like, come on, guys, I want to be here, and really stated his case. And he's stated the same case and has been consistent about wanting to be in New Orleans and wanting to play for the Pelicans. So I don't think that's an issue on that front. I think that's just a fun talking point for these national heads, and it's going to grab attention. Anytime Zion's name is thrown out there, it's grabbing attention. But the sharpshooting from outside, that's what's missing.
It is.
Trey Murphy had that career night, and what's happened since? A lot of, I think what happened is last year during that C.J. McCollum and Larry Nance Jr. trade, teams hadn't figured out the Pelicans yet. They hadn't figured out Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado.
Film's a great equalizer.
They figured them out this season. I think we can all agree on that, and that's maybe why they haven't had the success that they had. I would have liked to see Najee Marshall still have that ability to come off the bench and spark some juice. We've kind of missed seeing that. I'm not sure what's going on with him. He did start at the beginning of the season, so maybe that's affecting some things about his role, whether in his head, how he can come off the bench, or is it as a starter he provides that juice. That's missing. But I think, again, that's because teams have figured out the supporting cast around Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. C.J. McCollum is still putting up 20-something points every night. Somebody else has to jump in.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that's going to happen in the offseason when they start looking at that roster and trying to figure out, okay, can the sophomores take the next step, right? Okay, is this just, again, about film and scouting and taking away what they do well, or again, do we have to be able to take a look at how we are set up now and maybe make some changes there? All right, I'm going to do a little left turn on everybody right now. We're going to move away from football for a minute. We're going to come back, talk to LSU football, but I do want to ask about LSU women. Third seed in the They're a 3rd seed nationally. They take on the 2nd seed Utah in Greenville in that particular bracket. Miami Villanova also in that bracket as well. I believe you covered them last week, right?
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the Lady Tigers.
Well, I'll tell you what, that Tennessee loss was the best thing that could have ever happened to LSU. I know LSU fans don't want to hear that, but that ignited something defensively. I have never seen this LSU women's basketball team take it to like a Hawaii and a Michigan, where Michigan has the outright size on them and have just swarmed them defensively and just not, I mean, suffocating defense, right, is what we saw on display on the court. And because of that, they didn't allow Hawaii to get into a rhythm offensively, and they sure didn't let Michigan get into a rhythm offensively. And they played bigger than their size against Michigan, and I think that's why Michigan had so much trouble. You saw LaDasia Williams step up on the boards. Angel Reese is going to do what she does every night. It's amazing to see each new level she's seemed to reach in the postseason, which is what you want from your stars.
Yes.
You want your stars to either stay consistent through the postseason, or if they can take that next step, take it. And she definitely has. She's broken records with rebounds and points in the first 2 rounds. I think they do have some leverage against their next team in Greenville. I think rebounding and second chance points is gonna come into play. So we'll see what happens. Utah, I believe, right?
It is.
When they take on Utah, you look at Utah's win over Princeton. Princeton had a ton of second chance points over them and forced them to turn the ball over a ton. LSU was able to do that effectively against Michigan and beat Michigan in that way. So if Utah can't figure that out against these LSU Tigers, Kim Mulkey is going to be all over them.
You both played college ball. Talk about Kim Mulkey and the type of coach she is, and how motivated how she motivates and she takes teams to the next level everywhere she's been. I mean, this started back at Hammond High when she was, when she was playing there, going to Louisiana Tech, and then eventually again becoming a coach on the major college level.
Well, I didn't play college ball, actually.
Okay,
My running backwards into a pothole, high ankle injury took me out of soccer. I was a little small to really get through that anyway.
But you played ball, so you know about it.
Yes.
I think she builds programs in that sense. It's a foundation, laying the foundation. It's not just coming in with these fancy X's and O's schemes, because that only works as a flash in a pan for 1 year or two. Tulane's also another good example of that, where you really have to put the building blocks of foundation down and get that consistent, sustained success. And that's not just about, again, one star player, one star scheme, but just her presence on the sideline sticks out to me. She's such an active, engaged coach. I don't watch LSU women's basketball that closely, and quite frankly, being from a Tulane alumni, there's kind of that rivalry, but she makes me want to root for them, and I think that says a lot about her character and value.
She was a great gift for LSU, there's no doubt about it. Let me go through baseball real quick here again. LSU 19-2, still first in the nation. Second place in the SEC West, though. They take on Arkansas this week. They had a 2-1 series with Texas A&M last week, losing their first game in the SEC play. Tulane 6-15. They won at Washington last night. They're on the way to Hawaii. The poor team and Corey and everybody else going to. They're having a tough time going to Hawaii. 3 games against Hawaii this weekend. UNO Southland starts this week for that conference. They're 12-9. They got a 3-game set against Lamar. That's Brooke's former school. SLU is 12-9. They have Texas A&M Corpus Christi in their conference opener, and Nichols is 11-11, and they have Mississippi Valley last night, and then of course McNeese for a 3-game conference opener for them. Got to ask you one question before we go to football. Louisiana Derby, all those guys out there right now. You covered it this week. You got any tips for anybody? Well,
Instant Coffee is the favorite, but there are a couple of long shots that you should keep an eye out for. Remember, Instant Coffee did win on this track. It wasn't necessarily slop from what they say in racing terms, but it was a little wet leading into the day for the LeCompte Stakes when that horse did win, and he's more of a middle of the pack, and then we'll break out toward the end. With these horses and this field for the Louisiana Derby, there's not a lot of speed, so because of that, keep an eye on some of these long shots and some opportunities. May win some money this weekend. I don't know. I can't. I'll be there watching it, but It'll really be a good show.
But Instant Coffee's pretty much already qualified for the Kentucky Derby, right?
He could. So, of course, it's an automatic, right? With the 100 points that you would win toward qualifying for the Kentucky Derby. But I believe Instant Coffee has just enough points.
Okay. And what you got everybody's looking for as well. All right, we're talking Tulane first. Spring practice is going on. Tulane had their pro day last Thursday, which was a great success. Every single NFL team was there to see the Green Wave. And then, of course, spring game on Saturday. Take it from here. Talk a little bit about the Wave, how spring practice has gone, what you've seen, and then, of course, which was really kind of unprecedented, what we saw last week with Pro Day.
I was just about to say, I think when we talk about cementing a legacy, where Nick Anderson talks about the 98 players, the idea of setting a timeline and leaving that legacy there, Pro Day said it all. I mean, they had 11 legitimate prospects out there. Every single NFL team, and it wasn't just one scout from each team. Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl came down with a few of his scouts as well. Dennis Allen was there alongside Mickey Loomis, Michael Parrington, and several of the Saints scouts as well. They actually ran 40 minutes late because there were 4 different teams that put the linebackers through position drills, and then the Saints entirely ran Tajay Spears' position workout with Joel Thomas and was really focused kind of on pass catching drills to the point where they had to kind of simultaneously start the other drills. But I think one of the most important things of last season that goes so under the radar is the hiring of the strength and conditioning coach Kurt Hester that trained the majority of these guys for Pro Day. You know, Shane Wyatt had a PR in his bench press. He got a 39.5 vertical. Nick Anderson goes out there with a, I believe, 36 or 36.5 vertical and a 10-1 broad jump. I mean, for all the talk about his height, he had a higher vertical than Dorian Williams, and he was 4 inches behind Tajay on his broad jump, so that lower body explosiveness really showed there. And then his 4.54 40-yard dash. Tajay was unsurprised by the 4.47 because we see his play speed every single day. I don't think that needs to be validated, but really just such a strong showing from all of them. Even Tylo Phillips had a lot of time in this positional drill work, and I think that one-on-one time really could have changed his story. He has had really great use of hands, great power, but it felt so deliberate. It didn't feel like a throwaway, and I don't believe they've all ever had 32 NFL teams. So then the question is, okay, will you lose those 11 prospects alongside several more of the starters of the last 2 seasons that carried them through getting over that 2-10 hump? You know, Willie had said to us, talking about baseball, the middle of the field, they lost both of their inside linebackers. They're losing Lummy Young and Larry Brooks at safety and Macon Clark at nickelback. So that's, again, the entire middle of the field, defensively speaking. They brought in, I think, a few key transfers, Andre Sam and Darius Swanson at safety. They've really impressed me so far. Darius Swanson just has the size that you want at that safety role, and Andre Sam, his scheme understanding already just sticks out so much to the point where he was running with the ones already. They're kind of trying to figure out who's playing that slot role, but then you also have Jaden Kennedy coming back from injury, and what I'm seeing in practice now is they're getting a lot more physical this year. They're doing press coverage drills, man coverage drills. The linebackers are going up against the running backs and hitting hard, and that's, you know, keeping the plays in front of them. The zone defense that worked last year, but I think Sheil Wood brings just that kind of punch that I think they kind of need to get perhaps over the hump moving into next year. The offensive side of the ball, you lose a generational talent in Tajay Spears, but Michael Pratt has looked better than I've seen. Just the fact that he was homeschooled up until 9th grade and didn't play football until high school. That's astonishing to play quarterback at this level, have 8 different offensive coordinators, and outduel Caleb Williams when he needed to do so. Just looking at the Cotton Bowl drive, the 1 minute left, no timeouts. They're down both starting tight ends. They lose Deuce Watts, who's their biggest threat at wide receiver, and he uses his legs very smartly and then trusts Alex Bauman to make that catch, who's now tight end 1 for a reason. So I think the mental toughness, the microcosm of Alex Bauman stepping up when he had 4 catches all season, shows kind of the perpetuity of this program. Lawrence Keys has looked absolutely fantastic through spring camp, like way better again than I've seen so far. Really good transfers at wide receiver, Neil Keith Brown and Dante Fleming. So I think it all ties back to Willie Fritz, his ability in the transfer portal, and the fact that 50% of their recruiting class this year was from Louisiana. That's a local foothold that they've never had.
I'll ask you to take LSU. Their pro day is next week. I believe it's Wednesday. Also, again, it's an 8-week spring for them because they've taken a little break in the middle. But your thoughts about the Tigers?
Wow. Well, number one, fully exceeded expectations. When Brian Kelly was first hired, you know, there was talk about his recruiting style, maybe a little bit of that fake Southern accent, if that's what you want to call it, that grabbed national headlines. There was a lot of questions and not necessarily a lot of people that would go to bat for Brian Kelly when he first got here. But what solves all? Winning.
Right.
The fact that the Tigers played in the SEC championship game might not have been a game, but when you're playing that Georgia team, come on. But the fact that he was able to get LSU, that was predicted to be 5th, I believe, in the SEC West, and they were playing in the SEC championship against Georgia, speaks volumes. The fact that he was able, we saw a progression from quarterback Jane Daniels from week 1 to that bowl game, and I think they're going to continue to see development with him. They're figuring out, how can we build around this guy? What does he look like? How has he grown in this offense? They're adding in some players that I'm going to be looking for. On the defensive side of the ball, Mason Smith coming back from injury.
Huge.
Everybody, at least on this side in New Orleans, is looking forward to seeing him kind of thrive, especially when they're losing so many of their, now that are going to go to the draft, defensive linemen and some of those linebackers. You're excited about Harold Perkins, who came in as a freshman. He's returning. There's a lot of things to be excited about, but because they did exceed expectations in year 1, people, especially LSU fans, aren't going to look at, well, this is Brian Kelly's 2nd year, we'll ease off. No, no, no. You exceed expectations in year 1, you better exceed expectations in year 2. I think they have the pieces to do so. Offensive line, like the Saints, it's kind of been in question. Of course, they had the guy starting at center who had never started at center before. We saw the issues there, kind of how they move pieces around on the offensive line with injuries. That's going to be my biggest question mark and what I'm looking at in terms of practice and how they build up to fall, is who is starting from left tackle to right tackle in front of Jane Daniels, because that's obviously, when you have a mobile quarterback, that's got to be set. But man, they've got some interesting guys coming back. John Emery, and not sure what's going on with him. Seems like there's still a little bit of an academic issue. But if we saw him kind of take off at the end of last season, if he can continue moving forward, get his off the field stuff corrected, I think that's going to be a big key piece for this offense as well.
They seem like Holly, the freshman coming in. I'm interested to see again how much play Nussmeier gets in terms of snaps, because you got to be able to make sure you hold on to him after spring, and he doesn't end up going elsewhere, because then you're dealing with, again, Ricky Collins as a true freshman being the backup. So that's going to be one of the things that I'll be watching again through camp as well. Both teams look like, again, they're going to be ranked next year. LSU is going to probably be preseason top 10. Tulane's going to be in the preseason top 25. There's no reason to think that both programs are not going to have good years based off, again, what they did in recruiting both and what they've done in the transfer portal as well. They've lost some players, but they've done great in terms of bringing players in. I'm excited about the upcoming football season.
Me too.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, and Tulane, at least, there's expectations that we've never had. So unlike LSU fans who are kind of, like you said, expecting success, this is really a new special feeling for the first time in 83 years.
But
if only the two were playing on the field, right?
Which again, we can only hope can happen one day again. And I'd love to see that series come back. You know, it's a little bit more difficult now with, again, going with a 9-game conference schedule. You know, again, especially for the SEC.
And how things are moving
and how things are going there. But again, you'd love to see, again, this rivalry, especially with both teams being where they are right now on an upward trajectory, to be able to come back. I know a lot of people like to see that, especially old school guys like myself. Brooke, Maddy, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic panel. Appreciate it. Love to have both of you guys back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Again, Brooke Kirchhofer and also Maddy Hudak joining us today on today's program. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's so many ways to catch our program now. There's a QR code on your screen right now. Hey, click it with your phone. You'll go to my website, ericasher.com, or the WLAE-TV YouTube page. And then, again, set your DVR on your favorite time slot, because there are so many ways to catch our program now. You catch me on the radio, 106.1 FM, on Nash Icon. That is weekdays 4 to 6. You can listen live at ericasher.com, the iHeartRadio app, the TuneIn Radio app, or our digital platforms. Also, again, our podcast is on the Spotify app, but it's on all podcasting platforms. Just search Inside New Orleans Show with Eric Asher. And also join the conversation on our social media platforms as well. Special thanks again to Maddy and also Brooke. Also here to the WLA production staff who do a fantastic job. I'll get them in a moment. But I got to, again, give a credit to our underwriters who make this show possible. Please support our underwriters. We thank each and every one of them. As far as the WLA production staff, again, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Logan Graffia, and of course our director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. For Maddy and Brooke, I'm Eric Asher. See you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.